where we'll spend the majority of our time this evening. Romans chapter 1. We'll start in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, into birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Now, that's definitely a very, very strong portion there. Having read the words we just read, it may come across as slightly odd that has to be one of my favorite passages in the Bible. Maybe we aren't supposed to have favorites, but take it as you may. I don't know. I spoke from this portion a while ago, actually about a year ago, for my first message. Speaking about humanism. Now, tonight we won't be speaking about humanism, but still, I find this passage to be very beneficial. All Romans 1 for that matter, all the Bible for that matter, because I find it to be very, very applicable today, very in our current world. We see it as something that can be very, very applicable when viewing the world around us that we live in. Now, in our modern world, there's no mistake that to be made that people want to live apart from God. You see it everywhere. People do as they please, and they do what they feel like with no sense of accountability, no sense of morality. To the non-religious, morality is fluid. They claim it's just a result of the individual's personal experience. Again, if you were listening to my humanism message about a year ago, I actually spoke on that point a lot. It's subject to change when you take God out of it and you just make morality whatever is convenient to you. So, there's many people also that tend to claim that there is no God, or if there is one, we either have no understanding or knowledge of him, or he wants nothing to do with us. Now, this is where you kind of get what's called agnostics, people who believe that, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not, who knows? We have no way of knowing. So we kind of find ourselves, especially people like that, in this state of sort of lostness, I guess would be the right word. People who claim they don't know what to think, so they live in whatever way that makes them most happy, or they find most convenient, whether it's right or wrong, as long as they're happy. Now, the people that live with this sort of mindset, which is a lot of people, I've actually met people that verbatim have told me that, we can't really know much about God, so how could I be judged? There's actually a girl in high school I remember specifically having that talk with. So I've met people like this, and I know there's a lot of them out there. In a way, I can almost see where they're coming from. Maybe they've never read a Bible, or maybe by some miraculous set of scenarios they never had access to a Bible. As hard as that is to believe in 2023. If God is real, and I am to be judged, I'll be let off because, I've never had access to know anything about him. I didn't know any better. And Paul here, in this passage in Romans, I feel like addresses this sort of a thing very well. As to why all of humanity is without excuse before God and before his judgment. You can't make any excuse of ignorance to what his will is and who he is. And we'll see how Paul approaches this kind of a problem. Let's reread verse 20. The main point of the argument that I'd like to touch on this evening. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So let's break this down. The invisible things of God are clearly seen in creation. The world around us, the world that we live in, the world that we see every day. I mean, look around this room, we're in creation, walk outside, we're in creation. Creation. And creation here is a lens through which we can learn of the invisible things of God. These intangible things, concepts like who he is, what he's like. Even if you've never had, again, by some miraculous means, the opportunity to hold a Bible in your life or have someone sit and explain to you who God is, maybe through that minuscule percentage, God has personally revealed himself through creation to all of us. There's no excuse because God bears witness of himself in creation. You can't argue that you are somehow ignorant of the truths of God. And tonight I'd kind of like to talk about these things, these truths that we can learn about God through creation. So, first of all, Paul here in Romans starts off with two examples outright of what we can learn about God and his creation. And in my opinion, these are probably the two most obvious and straightforward ones to understand. He says, even his eternal power and Godhead. So we'll spend a little time on these two things. Turn to Genesis 1:1. This is a very, very clear-cut example of God's eternal power. I'll read a few verses here. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So, one of the ultimate examples of God's eternal power seen in creation. So cut and dry, the creation of the world, the creation story. Now, it would be one thing to just be a creator, like, I'm a creator. If you look at it that way, I've had Legos before, I've built things, I program, maybe that's a creation code, I don't know. I know some people in here have built things. I know Josiah has built some chairs and stuff. He's a creator in that sense. You get what I'm getting at. But, obviously we're not nearly as talented as God is. you may look at what man's created, and I definitely think that a lot of people who live apart from God look at what man's created and think it's very impressive. People point to like the seven wonders of the world, the pyramids, these huge, impossible to build structures, things as complex as iPhones, quantum computing, these amazing things that humans have created, spacecraft, amazing things. But I think what's made clear and what sets God's creation apart from our creation is his eternal power, as Paul mentioned. We create using what God has already provided for us, but God created out of nothing. He created the material to build with. He spoke it into existence. To make something out of nothing, without a doubt, takes eternal, infinite power. To make anything out of nothing, let alone a whole universe and planet with life on it. So, by him, all things were created. There's no argument. There's no way to diminish his eternal power when looking at creation and the world around us. It's impossible for me to understand how people can't see this one. There's no way, even life, creating life. How does something create life out of unliving matter? My grandfather has spoken on this point a lot better. I can definitely put it in better words than I can. How can life come out of non-living matter? The only way is to have eternal, infinite power. So that's one. His eternal power seen in creation, clear as day. Now, the second Paul mentions is his Godhead. We can see the Godhead of God looking at his creation, of course. Again, very straightforward. Now, in a sense, you can look at this two ways. One way is that speaking to God's deity, God's divinity and his deity is conveyed through the fact that he created everything. But I really think there's more ways to think about that. Obviously, we could say, well, God created everything. He's the only one with eternal power. Of course, he has to be God. There's no other God than him. So there's one way of looking at that, his Godhead. But also, I think what we'd be kind of robbing ourselves to not look at here is how Godhead can also sort of point to his divine attributes, his godly attributes seen in creation. Now, you can speak on this for eternity, divine attributes seen in creation. And technically, the eternal power falls under this one also. But there's many, many more to consider. Going down this train of thought, I think one of the most amazing aspects of him that we can learn by looking at his creation is his workmanship. Now, the commentary that I was reading put it this way, that a workman is known by his work. Josiah recently spoke about his work on resurfacing this floor in his house. And, that takes a level of workmanship that I don't know if I could ever commit to. That looked like a lot of work, seeing all the slides and the machines, and, that's a lot. And so it takes a level of workmanship and commitment for something to come out really good like that. Any shortcuts that are taken on the way would have been obvious in the finished product. The same principles apply to God's creation too. Looking at what God's created, we kind of get an idea of what kind of a workman he is. When you look at creation, you see nothing but really, really amazing craftsmanship. There's no corners cut. There's no expense, but he didn't buy the cheap lumber or particle board. He bought, he didn't buy anything. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was neglected. I kind of thought of as preparing this message, as I was preparing this message, I kind of thought of a lot of different examples of things we can look at in creation. for his workmanship as examples of his amazing workmanship. But I think for some reason I landed on this one, and maybe you can talk to me after if you think there might be a better one, or if this one works for you, but it definitely worked for me thinking about it. And that would be his creation of water. Something so simple that we take for granted every day. But God, when crafting this element, this molecule, whatever you want to call it, this thing called water, he didn't leave out any detail. He didn't leave out any consideration. He didn't rush it. He didn't neglect any aspect of it, any detail. Now, the climate of our earth, which he's created, allows water to first of all, exist in our oceans, in these massive bodies of water, allowing thousands and thousands, maybe millions of species of fish to live in. He set up creation just so, with the right temperatures and the right atmospheric conditions, so that it can evaporate and form clouds and travel vast distances and rain down on land, providing, rivers, lakes, and streams on land, the ability for plants to grow on land, of course, the ability for us to live. And now, getting a little more scientific, water has what's called a high specific heat, meaning that it can absorb, maybe I'm wording this wrong, but again, talk to me after, maybe I didn't get this right in my schooling, but it has the ability to absorb a lot of thermal energy before it changes states, from water to liquid to gas, or solid to liquid to gas. That makes it nature's one of the best coolants, and of course, God designed us to use it, to sweat off when we're hot. It's one of the best natural coolants, and here we are, we're able to sweat it off and cool off. Amazing design there. And it also has this unique property that, not shared by most elements or molecules from what I've learned, but where its solid form, ice, is actually less dense than its liquid form. It means when a lake freezes, obviously the water doesn't sink to the bottom, and then the top freezes more, and then it doesn't sink to the bottom, and eventually you just have this block of ice that was once a lake. Doesn't work like that. The solid is less dense than the liquid, and therefore it stays on the surface and insulates the water underneath, so that the fish can kind of keep doing whatever fish do during the cold season under the water. Now, this may sound like a little bit, whatever, just water, who cares? But that's just water. It's designed so well. If any of those aspects of water were any different, I think it would heavily affect life on Earth, and maybe life on Earth wouldn't be able to exist at all without having designed it so perfectly. And of course, he makes it one of the most important molecules for the survival of organisms on Earth. And of course, he made it one of the most abundant substances on Earth. Very convenient. People say, humans are made up of about 75% water, and yet, it's the most abundant thing on Earth, water. No, I'm no physicist, I'm no geologist, but I find it quite amazing. If God took no shortcuts in such a small thing like water, how much more so in all of his other creations? The level of workmanship is evident, and it's visible in all of God's creations. It's pretty hard to ignore when you sit and look at the world around us, that level of workmanship. And again, you can only wonder what kind of a workman would create such an amazing creation. Now, this is maybe one attribute of him that we can think of in creation. I've told it, of course, it's stemming off the subject of these divine attributes we can see in creation. And actually, at this time, I'll leave that thought there. I find the discussion of workmanship to be one of the best, actually, when viewing his divine attributes. Because in that workmanship, a lot of his divine attributes are on display. I feel that attributes such as his perfection, his foresight, his compassion over creation, his love, they're all exhibited in that amazing workmanship in creation. Him not missing any detail demonstrates the level of care and love he has for his creation. You look at Eden before sin entered the world, and it's clear that God wanted nothing more than prosperity for his creation. So in his workmanship, we can see that as we read through the beginning of Genesis. Everything was designed so perfectly in such an ordered way in creation. His unmatched knowledge, omniscience is probably a better word, is seen in his ability to design such a variety of creatures all from scratch and have them and provide them the ability to coexist on our planet in harmony. We could talk about these divine attributes of him seen in creation on and on and on. It would take more than just a Wednesday night, definitely, to discuss that. But I feel like for tonight, for the sake of time, that's where I'll leave the discussion on divine attributes. They're all visible when looking at the workmanship of creation around us. So kind of having discussed these 2 points brought by Paul, these 2 traits of God mentioned here in Romans, we kind of learn that, of course, we can see and learn about God in his creation. Even God forbid putting the Bible aside, just looking at creation, we can see these things. But now I'd like to take some time and I guess double back a bit and discuss a little bit about the people that Paul is speaking to here in his argument in Romans 1. These people who existed both at the time of the writing of the book and of course during the present day, people who have believed that they may have some sort of excuse. That they have this idea in their head that they would follow what God would have for them to do if they had just been given some sort of evidence of him even being there. Maybe if they weren't so lost without any knowledge of this invisible God, maybe they would obey him. Maybe, of course, it would be so clear as day if you'd only give them a sign and teach them something about him. I'm going to, just for the sake of continuing on with this conversation, I'm going to refer to these people as heathens. Maybe there's a better word you could think of. One of the commentaries I was reading used the word heathens. I was like, well, I think that works fine. Only 2 syllables, so I think we'll work for our discussion here. But yeah, so now I'd like to kind of beg the question, are these so-called heathens truly lost? Is it possible that such people exist, that in the course of their lifetime, there just hasn't been enough witness of God to them, not enough substantial evidence of God or who he is or what he wants for them to do or how he wants them to live? Maybe is it possible that people exist like that, but there just hasn't been given enough proof? Who are lost without it being their own fault. Now, having read what we've read about creation so far, I think we can easily say not. But I think what Paul really gets across here in Romans is not only that they're wrong, but he shows that these heathens, or whatever you'd like to call them, are not lost because of knowledge that they don't have about God, but rather the light which God has provided to everyone on earth who's ever lived, to all creation, that they refuse. Those things which may be known of God in creation have been revealed to them them all. And God has left no one without a revelation of himself. There aren't any exceptions to this. Some people think, they get this idea that God, doesn't reach all people. I actually, growing up, for a second, I had that thought, like, well, does everyone have a Bible? How could everyone know God and they not have a Bible? But, of course, having grown up and learned, I can see why that way of thinking is flawed. Of course, there's many people who've never, had a Bible in their whole lives. And in a sense, there's truth to that. Even looking at the scriptures, there's plenty of people in the Bible who existed before the writing of the scriptures. And they would have obviously be subject to the same standard we are. God's perfect standard. Names that popped in my head were Job, Abraham, Noah. All these people exist at times where there is little to no scripture at all. Were people living at their time excused from God's wrath? Absolutely not. Just because the writing of the Bible wasn't finished yet? No, absolutely not. We don't need, as wonderful and amazing of a gift as the Bible is, we don't even need it to recognize God, that there's a God there and what He'd have us to do. Obviously, things are more clearly outlined and stated in the Bible, with more nuance available. But God has given everyone the witness needed in His creation. These people, Job, Abraham, Noah, many more, they lived by faith, holding true to the faith that in what God had revealed to them personally at the time. Even without the Bible being developed, Noah never for a second questioned, anything when he was told to build an ark. He didn't have to read a whole Bible and grow up in a church to understand that this was God speaking to him and this is what God wanted him to do. Abraham didn't question anything when he was told to head to a far off land. And Job, whose book was likely the first written chronologically, what do we read at the beginning of the book? That he was righteous and upstanding before God. He didn't need a Bible. He didn't need the vast history of God's dealing with Israel and all these, stories we read of in the Bible to understand who God is and what He wants for us. You didn't have to be, born into a Christian home and brought to church every Sunday to understand how to live righteously before God. God reveals Himself to all through His creation. And just as Paul said, no one is without excuse. And just as we've discussed so far, all the aspects of His character are on display in the world around us. It's not only is it on display, but it's not easy to ignore. And even aside from creation, putting it to the side for just a moment, God Himself has also, intervened in man's history time and time again to exercise His wrath towards sin. Are instances like those not enough in of themselves? God, we not see his dissatisfaction when humans sinned, when He, unleashed a flood upon the entire earth. I think it's clear how God felt at that point. There's no mistake looking at that event as to why God was mad. He makes it very clear. He makes his dissatisfaction very, very clear. And even in the modern day, we kind of see examples of that are hard to ignore. And somehow people manage to, I don't know how. The example that came to my mind was, in the 1980s, I think God made a very, very clear display of His displeasure towards, humanity's rampant sexual immorality when he allowed for the AIDS epidemic that spread like wildfire. Even to Israel directly, God throughout the Bible allowed them to fall into bondage time and time again when they departed from his will. So even with the Bible and creation to the side, God provides witness of himself in his wrath towards sin, in his exercising of his wrath, in his intervention in our history. It can't be ignored. We just looking at those, we kind of get an idea of what displeases him, what he's like, maybe infer what he really wants for us. Now, with all this evidence given, why do we see that people still seem to act like they're lost or appear to be lost in our current world? Still act like they haven't been given enough proof. You haven't been provided enough witness of a creator and what he's like. Now let's read Romans 1, verse 21 before our continuing. Romans 1, verse 21. Because that when they knew of God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. And here we see the true reason for people living in ignorance of God. It's not that they're actually ignorant that there is a God. It's that despite having all the truth in front of them, they would rather reject him in order to live as they please. Creation brings all the divine attributes of God within the range of our of mankind's limited comprehension and understanding. We've kind of discussed this already. There's no mistake to be made that everyone should know that there's a God and what he's like. There's no games to be played there. And when I say us, I mean sinful man. It's that being conscious of God, and meditating on his person simply by looking at the creation that exists all around us. It makes us feel remorseful. It makes sinful man feel remorseful. It kind of pricks at the conscience when you look around and can see nothing but God and who he is. And when we sin, we're thinking about God and his person. Yeah, it pricks at our conscience quite a bit. People want to sin. They want to live apart from God and live as they please. So they want to run from God. So what do? They try to forget, they try to ignore, and they change what God and his creation is and what it means to them. And they kind of twist it to suit their needs. Let's kind of continue reading what Paul says, starting again from verse 21. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, into birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. In their willful ignorance, they turned God and his creation into something corruptible. Let's say whatever theories they want about God or creation, so long as the clear image of God that's seen in it is taken out of the picture. The atheists right now still can't give a reasonable explanation as to where life began, but it's fine as long as God's in the picture in their theory, as long as God's name is omitted. What's going on in the world today makes a lot of sense when you kind of understand this dynamic taking place. The truths of creation, seen in creation, are so clear. The only way that man can run from them is by replacing creation with something corruptible. I found kind of while looking into this topic and thinking on these things, something very ironic, having considered all that we've discussed. And that is that the creation that I feel tells us the most about God and how we are to truly conduct ourselves is mankind. We are one of his creations. Let's turn to back to Genesis 1, but this time verse 27. Genesis 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now we are the only part of God's creation made in his image. Looking at ourselves and some of our own attributes, we can kind of see miniatures or mirrors of God's attributes and his will. Now of course we are corrupted by sin, we're a corrupted being. But stripping away our sinful nature, we can kind of see that we can kind of tell a lot from ourselves about God. The first one that came to mind was that we have dominion. Over all the earth, there's no